Hello, everybody. I think we are about ready to start. We are just letting in some people who are in their waiting room, but I think we can start. So first of all, welcome. Welcome to this webinar about finding a partner in conservation. I am Merel Zimmerman. I'm from the EAZA Executive Office, and I will be facilitating this webinar. And my partner in crime is Wouter, who is the technical support for today, and he will be working behind the scenes to help you with if you have any problems with watching this webinar. You can connect to him through the private chat, and he will try and solve any issues. He's also put his email in the chat, so you can also use that if you are more confident with that one. So we are recording this webinar to make it available later, so just so you are aware, and you can share it later maybe with other people who couldn't join today. And today's speakers will be three people actually. It will be Jon Taylor, who's the Deputy Director of Save the Rhino International, Michaela Butorova, who's the Partnerships Manager for SRI, which is the abbreviation of Save the Rhino International, and also Jack Bedford, who is the Fundraising Officer. And I would first like to thank them very much for doing this. They were originally scheduled to do a similar thing at the EAZA Conservation Forum in May, but that was unfortunately cancelled due to reasons everybody knows. But they were still open to help us with this and share their knowledge and experience on how to find a conservation partner in this slightly different format. So this is a webinar that comes from the EAZA Conservation Committee, and they're always trying to find ways to support members to do more conservation. And one of the things that comes up regularly is that EAZA members, small and big, sometimes have difficulty finding a good partner in conservation. And Friederike van Houweld, who's also here from Basel Zoo, she's the chair of the Rhino Taxon Advisory Group, but also member of the Conservation Committee. And she actually suggested to involve SRI to talk about this topic. So I just wanted to ask Friederike, can you give a little background on why you think that we should use Save the Rhino as one of the examples? If you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on.
Thank you, Merel, and a warm welcome to everyone out there. It is actually a very great pleasure for us today to share some very useful experiences with you. And well, we really hope that after this webinar, some of you will have found a few answers to your beanie questions and how to find a conservation partner. As Merel said, today the team from Save the Rhino will talk about it. Now, the question really is, why did we choose Save the Rhino as a partner to share the experience? And I have to go back a few years ago. Save the Rhino has been partnered with zoos for many, many years, and they really know how zoos work, what the problem zones are in zoos, and how to present the work in the public. But the story with Save the Rhino really started in 2005 when EAZA launched the EAZA Rhino campaign. And running a campaign is a lot of fun, but also a lot of work. And one part that is highly important when running a campaign is obviously the question, how do you choose your conservation partners in the field? And you want to have partners that are reliable, they are trustworthy, who will actually stick to their words and will use the money collected by EAZA members according to what was agreed upon, and who will report and keep zoo visitors informed. And at that time, I was a part of the Rhino campaign team, and really the best thing we decided on was to ask for help. And since Save the Rhino has been working with certain zoos beforehand, and their CEO, Kathy Dean, is very well known for her work within the IUCN African Rhino Specialist Group and the Asian Rhino Special Group, it was quite clear that we wanted them to help us out. So we were even more lucky than as Save the Rhino not only stepped in to share the knowledge, they even employed one person for 1 year to guide us and to find the best conservation field projects for rhinos. The campaign really was a success, but the success was not just due to the high amount of money that was collected for rhino conservation. What was really a success was the fact that those who cooperated with Save the Rhino as a mediator between zoo and field project stayed long-term engaged. The zoos were really motivated and happy and became long-term partners with Save the Rhino. So Save the Rhino, in my eyes, is one of the best NGOs I came across that really care about a good relationship between field partners and donors. And it doesn't really matter what donor, if it's a zoo, private people, companies, whatever. And when we were now searching for an NGO that has a knowledge of how to choose field partners and to share their secrets and how they do it, especially the part of happiness to everyone involved, it was kind of obvious that we have a very good partner already engaged with zoos and field project at the hand, namely Save the Rhino. So here we go. Meryl introduced Michaela, Jack, and Jon, and some of you may know them already as they also came to past EAZA conferences and spoke about the work at the Rhino Tag. But today it's not really about rhinos. Well, it's on how to find good partners and what a good partner really should look like. So thank you so much in advance to you, Michaela, Jack, and Jon, and I hope that all of you will enjoy, learn, and have many good questions at the end of their presentation. So out and over to Meryl.
Thank you, Friederike. So, like you say, let's get into the meat of this webinar. Jon, Michaela, and Jack will be taking turns in speaking, and we'll try to cover a lot of ground and how to start the process of developing a long-term vision for conservation within your institution, to look at different ways of finding those partners, and the importance of defining but also your partners' expectations and adaptive management. So there will be time at the end for questions, but feel free to already share them in the chat and also share your own experiences in the chat, and we can see at the end what we can discuss as a group. And I will try and highlight some of those questions in the presentation, but we will also try to give back after the meeting if we can. And I think, Jon, I would like now to hand over the reins to you to begin with the presentation. How do you find a partner in conservation?
Thank you, Meryl. Thank you very much. And I think I've got the presentation working. That's fantastic. I must start by saying thank you to Meryl and Friederike for those lovely introductions. We'll try and live up to them. Thank you to EAZA for inviting us along today. I hope we can be useful to you. Thank you to all of this amazing list of people I can see on my screen who've turned up to listen to us. We will try and be helpful as we can. We've got a lot of ground to cover and time is flying, so I will try and be as quick as I can. When we started this presentation, we quickly realized that finding the right conservation partner is very much like finding any other partner. It's like finding a personal partner. And we thought, well, that's a world that most of us understand in one way or another, and it's a world that we can talk about. So we'll keep that analogy going through the presentation. It works really quite well for us. But Michaela and Jack are going to talk about how you might find the right partner, what you might be looking for from a relationship, who might help you. What I'm going to talk about at the beginning is the why question. Why are you looking for a date in the first place? Why are you looking for a partner? And that brings us very quickly into the world of conservation strategy, and particularly zoo conservation strategy. And I know from looking at the list of participants who've registered for this, some of you already have conservation strategies, and it'll be very interesting to hear your experiences later on. But some of you I know don't have a conservation strategy, and it's such a useful thing to have if you're looking to move from ex situ conservation in the zoo, and you're all doing conservation, amazing conservation work in your zoos. But if you're looking to extend that to in situ conservation work, then why do you want to make that move? And knowing why you're doing it and what you're looking for is really important. I just threw in, because you might think, why is a guy from an NGO talking to us about zoo conservation strategy? In a previous life, let's see if the slides will move. Yes. In a previous life, I was London Zoos. I ran the conservation program for East and Southeast Asia. That's a younger version of me measuring tiger footprints somewhere east of Vladivostok, I think, out looking for animal tigers. So I have worked on zoo conservation strategies, and in an even more previous life, I was also a keeper once upon a time. You probably can't tell from the photo because that's a cub, but that's actually a saber-toothed cat back from the days when we used to have woolly rhinos at London Zoo. It really has been there that long. That's back in the days of my youth, or as scientists call it, the Pleistocene. But yeah, I've worked with zoo conservation strategies in the past, so I do know a little bit about it, but that doesn't make me an expert. There are bigger experts in the audience, I know that. So this is the big question. Why are we doing this? Why are we getting to this world? And if we're putting together a conservation strategy, what is it that we're going to focus on? Being zoos, we tend to focus on species, although not always. And I'll talk about the different kinds of species that we can kind of focus on in conservation strategy, not because you're unaware that there are different types of animals, but because the choice of focus can often influence then the kind of partners that you might be looking for beyond the zoo in order to help you do that work. The other thing that's going to be really important is who is driving your conservation strategy. Quite often it's driven by keepers who are very excited about conservation work in the zoos and want to extend that to conservation work in situ in range states or in the countries where the animals are living wild. Conservation leadership often comes from the top, from the boardroom, from the management. There's some fantastic conservation leaders leading zoos. And it may, if you're a large zoo, it may come from other parts of the zoo. You may have a very well-established education team or other teams that are very excited about extending from ex situ into in situ work. So who's driving this is going to be another important factor in where you focus, the kind of things you're looking for in the relationship that you're going out and seeking in the world. I will flick through. So if you've got a species focus, the most obvious choice is to go for something that's a charismatic species. And there are great reasons for doing that. These are the animals that everybody knows. Your public are going to know them. They're wonderfully engaging animals. They can be ambassadors for other species that are less well known. And there's usually, around the big charismatic species, there's usually already a conservation infrastructure in place. So particularly if you're new to conservation work, or in situ conservation work, and you're not quite sure where to go, if you're looking at charismatic species, you'll quite often find well-established conservation programs and probably well-established conservation partners like NGOs who can help you come into that world. So there are really good reasons for concentrating on charismatic species. If you want to go beyond the charismatic, when I was working at London Zoo, we had a particular focus on edge species, and who doesn't love a northern hairy-nosed wombat? But these are species that are evolutionarily distinct, so they're a unique branch of evolution, as well as being globally endangered. So if you want to get a bit more specialized, there's still lovely, well, there's a lot of lovely animals in there that people are going to recognize and associate with, but it can be a bit more advanced in terms of a bit more specialized in terms of conservation. If you're interested in habitats for a certain extent, you can go for umbrella species. So, I mean, our lovely tiger here is charismatic, certainly, but also an umbrella species. I think that's an amur. if that's an AMOR, then you're protecting, if you're looking after them, you're protecting huge swathes of forest in eastern Russia. If you're protecting Indian tigers, then you're protecting the floodplains of northern India and many other habitats around the Asian mainland and into Sumatra. So an umbrella species is a fantastic way to go, and by protecting umbrella species, you're protecting a whole load of species. Or you can go and specialize. This is an edge species again, but this is a Bolivian chinchilla rat. You won't have one of these in your zoos, I think, because only 2 of them have ever been found. And they live in an area of about 100 square kilometers somewhere in the Bolivian forest. I know not where. They are incredibly important as an edge species. They are not getting any conservation attention at all, as far as I'm aware. So, you know, there are zoos who are quite capable of putting their own conservation field teams into the on the ground. And if you were to go specialist like this, you know, you would have to be not only looking for a partner, you wouldn't find one. There are no chinchilla rat NGOs, as far as I know. But there are no existing conservation programs either. You would have to do the whole thing yourself. And, you know, Zoological Society of London, Zoological Society of Frankfurt can do these things. Other big organizations can, but it's a heck of a thing to do. Let's press on. I was just going to mention, of course, without any personal bias whatsoever, that you can sometimes find species that tick all the boxes. They're charismatic, they're edge species, they're umbrella species, and they require lots of specialist conservation. I wouldn't name anybody in particular, you know, but look, there's a Javan rhino, how lovely. Anyway, moving on. You sometimes don't go through species focus. I know zoos that have spectacular plains of Africa or Indian River Valley or Asian jungle. Exhibits where they focus on a habitat and a collection of a community of species, and you could choose that as a focus for conservation if that's what's particularly exciting in your zoo or what you're particularly excited about. If it's coming from a particular set of keepers or the education department, you might want to focus on an issue instead, and you might focus on something like palm oil. And that might be through a species like orangutan, or it might be just straightforward conservation. We're going to talk about oil palm. We're going to talk about climate change. We're going to talk about ocean pollution. So finding a focus that is meaningful for you in your zoo is incredibly important. If you've got a strategy, then you're not blown side to side by the winds of fashion in conservation. You know why you're there, you know what you're looking for, and you know what you want. And having that foundation is really important. Let's flick on. We could spend the whole afternoon very easily talking about the inclusion of people in conservation, and I've got about 2 minutes. So I will just say sustainable development and conservation are inextricably linked. People are usually the problem. They're almost always the solution to the problem. And it's very difficult to do it well. It's we used to get accused of doing what we call fortress conservation, which is just putting up a wall and saying animals on this side, people on that side, you shall not meet, and you know, occasionally driving people out of their homes. That doesn't happen anymore, thank God. What I do see regularly is either a sort of mental separation where we know people are important, but we don't do people. We're wildlife biologists. We do wildlife. We'll bring in a social NGO to do the people bit. And that can work, but I don't really think it's possible in the 21st century. If we are animal and conservation people, we have to be people. I think is probably the truth. The other thing I see regularly is it's done enthusiastically, but it's done very naively. You know, the kind of conversation where we talk about the local communities as if they're one homogenous blob of people. You know, everybody living around Chitwan thinks the same thing, and of course they do not. The only thing I would say here is that people they have to be part of a conservation strategy, and talk to the people who work in sustainable development, in international development. because they tend to be about 20 years ahead of us conservationists in terms of knowing how to work with people who live in the area that we're interested in. So we could talk all afternoon about that. The other thing to be aware of is as well as what you want, what you can bring to a conservation partnership. Obviously, money is something you can bring, and it's very important. It's usually what's missing. So if you can bring conservation euros or dollars or whatever, that's incredibly valuable. But you know, you may have other skills. You may, as in the photo here, be an excellent Komodo dragon impersonator. More usefully, you may have an incredible education department, or you may have other skills, and Jack will say a bit more about that later on. But knowing what you can bring to the relationship, as well as what you want to focus on and what you want to get out of it, is really important. I will just say a little bit about Save the Rhino strategy, because we also, I mean, as well as working with our amazing zoo partners and other partners, we raise money from the general public. So we have our own resources and they are limited. So we have to decide where we're going to focus our efforts. And we've made 3 key decisions. One of them is that of the 5 species of rhino, we focus on the critically endangered ones. So we're talking about black rhinos in Africa and Javan and Sumatran rhinos in Asia. We focus on, well, with the black rhinos at least, we focus on key 1 and key 2 populations. These are defined by the African Rhino Specialist Group, and they are the bigger populations and the ones with the higher reproduction rate. So they are the most viable populations. Obviously, with the Javan and Sumatran rhinos, there are fewer than 80 animals each. So key 1 and key 2 definitions don't apply. The other thing that's important is that we work very closely with the International Rhino Foundation in the US. We flatter ourselves, but we're right, that we're the biggest rhino conservation organization in Europe. And IRF do the similar job in the US. And between us, our full team and their full team, the 2 biggest rhino conservation organizations in the world, there are fewer than 20 of us. So we make sure that we coordinate our efforts. I was out at their annual meeting in Nashville, Tennessee last year. They come and visit us. We talk regularly. We make sure that we're aligned so that we can coordinate the efforts, because between us, we do not have nearly enough resource. So we work very closely with IRF. So that's our strategy: critically endangered, most viable populations, and work very, very closely with our partners in the US to make sure we coordinate. I think that brings my first bit to a close. I will hand over to Jack and hope I haven't stolen too much of his time. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thank you very much, John, and sorry for the little delay there, just waiting for the control to switch over on the presentation. So once you've chosen the species or the issue that you want to support, how do you actually go about finding who the players in the field are? Well, thankfully there are lots of places that you can turn when researching organisations, and here we'll go through a few key points of contact that you might find useful in your search. There we go. So your first port of call should be EAZA, or your regional zoo and aquarium association. And a great place to start with them is the EAZA Taxon Advisory Group for the species you're interested in. So many of the tags have a strong working relationship with charities and organisations working in the wild, and they can offer information about their work or what the greatest conservation needs are. And more broadly, associations like EAZA will have good links with in situ organisations across the board. And in addition to that, of course, EAZA will have its own conservation objectives, which might well be useful for shaping whatever strategy you want to take forward. as Meryl mentioned earlier, and Frederica as well, the annual conferences that EAZA do are another great place where you can find out who's working in the field and get an idea of what kind of partnerships you might be able to form. And so some of these NGOs will take part in the tag sessions and they'll give an update about their work in the field. And others will be there attending, and you can contact them in the breaks in between sessions and work out if you can develop some sort of partnership. And of course, we can't forget about EAZA's conservation campaigns. And so these happen every couple of years. And as we know at the moment, it's the Which Fish campaign, which is all about sustainable consumption of ocean wildlife. But these campaigns have been going on for quite a long time now. The Save the Rhino campaign was 2005 to 2006, and there's been campaigns every year in between. And so there's lots and lots of connections with various different organisations working in situ on conservation of a vast array of different species. And EAZA hosts all of that information on their website, so you can find out all the different campaigns of the past and potentially identify some organisations that you might want to get in touch with about supporting. Another great place to approach is the IUCN specialist group for the species that you're interested in. Part of the Species Survival Commission, these groups are made up of scientific experts and conservation stakeholders, and they focus on promoting the best management of species to ensure that there is population for generations to come. They're really responsible for leading the agenda on the conservation of those species, and they'll have really good connections with programs and NGOs working in situ to make those things happen. And you can see that link there will take you to all of the different specialist groups, and hopefully that will be another good port of call for you when trying to look for an organisation to support. And so while it's useful to know which organisations are out there, it's just as important to get an understanding of what they're like to work with. And so a great way to do this is to contact your fellow zoos and aquariums who are already supporting the conservation of the species or the issue that you're interested in. And a good place to look is, of course, EAZA's conservation database or their annual report. And these showcase the different in situ projects that EAZA members have supported in the past year. And so you can have a look through that database or through the list there, find zoos that are supporting the kind of programs you're interested in, and get in contact with them to ask them about their experiences. So on top of finding out more about the program that they're supporting, you can ask them if their expectations are actually being met in the partnership. Are they confident that the support they're giving is really making an impact? And you can ask them any other questions that you think will be important to work out if you could work with that partner too. And of course, the other method you can turn to is a good old-fashioned internet search. So you can search for organisations focused on your chosen species or issue, and then you can have a look at their websites to find out more about the work and if the aims and values of their organisation matches with yours. But how do you actually know if the organisation you're interested in is going to be a good fit for you? The process is more of an art than a science, really, but there are some key pieces of information that you can have a look for on their website, such as their vision and mission statements, whether they tell you the strategies that guide their work, if they have a How We Spend Money page, or if they produce impact reports, which details the difference that they've been making with those funds in the past year. And of course, if they actually keep you updated on their blog or their news section with all of the latest news from the field and from their work. This will all help you to build a better picture of the organisation and to work out if they're going to be able to meet what you want to achieve and get out of a partnership. And whilst I've said all that, it is important to remember that not all conservation organisations are the same size or have the same funding available, and so not all of them will be able to do this. For example, you may have identified a project that you're really passionate about, but it's run by a really small team of scientists working in the field with not a lot of funding. So they're probably not going to have the time to spend hours in the office updating their website or producing glossy impact reports. But if you're confident that they're making a real difference and you believe in supporting their work, you should definitely go ahead and do that. But it's really useful to manage your expectations about what you can get back out of the partnership. And it's all well and good doing all this research on your own, but sometimes you just need to get on the phone or meet with someone from the organisation that you're interested in. And you can think of it a little bit like a first date. It's a great opportunity to start getting to know one another, build a rapport, and work out if you'd actually like to start a relationship. So once you've reached out and asked them for a call or a meeting, it's a really good idea to plan an agenda for the meeting. So jot down some questions that you want to have answered by them to help you make your decision, and then take minutes throughout the call or the meeting so you have all that information to refer back to afterwards, or if you want to consult your colleagues before making a final decision. So now that you've thought about who you want to start a relationship with, it's time to think about what you can offer to that relationship. What value and contribution can your organisation bring to a conservation project? And of crucial importance, does it actually fit with what the project needs? So as Jon already said, and as I'm sure you're all aware, the biggest limiting factor for conservation is very often funding. Everyone here knows how important conservation is, but unfortunately, it's still not a widely appreciated fact. And only about 3 to 4% of charitable funding is spent on conservation every year. And that's despite the fact that we're living through a biological crisis, a biodiversity crisis. And so there are so many worthy projects working around the world on all sorts of wildlife issues, and they're all struggling to get work done and competing for funding. So by making a financial contribution, you're really enabling them to get the work done. A lot of these organizations already have that technical expertise already, but it's just the funding they need to be able to put that expertise into practice and make a difference. However, some projects will be looking for non-financial forms of support, and specific expertise could well be something that your organisation can bring to a conservation project. So it's worth having a think about what kind of expertise you and your institution has and how that will fit in with a partner. Perhaps you have strengths in scientific interpretation or communications, like Taronga Zoo in Australia, who've been supporting the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary to develop materials and boards for their visitor centre. Or perhaps you have an expertise in education. So the Zoological Society of London supported Lalesha Luangwa, which is an education programme that our partners work on in Zambia. And they actually went out to the country and trained up educators in this new curriculum so they could continue teaching each generation of kids all about wildlife and conservation in the region. Or it might even be veterinary expertise for a specific species that you want to support. And so returning to rhinos, Cincinnati Zoo in the US was the first zoo, or the first place where Sumatran rhinos were successfully bred in captivity. The Sumatran rhinos are now all back in Indonesia, and the focus is really on breeding up that population in a more natural habitat. But Cincinnati Zoo is still providing lots and lots of important advice and support to ensure that the rhinos stay healthy and keep producing more calves. And beyond that kind of specific expertise, you may just be able to provide staff time and resources, which could really help out a smaller project to get more work done, basically. And, yeah. And the other thing we thought about was reintroductions. Whilst EAZA ex situ programs are the ones that are going to be coordinating reintroductions, there are often many different ways that zoos and aquariums can support them when they do happen. And so last year we saw the return of black rhinos to Rwanda from 3 zoos in Europe, and keepers from Tver Kralove supported this by accompanying the rhinos on their journey back to Rwanda and then overseeing their release into Akagera National Park. Or perhaps it's using your facilities to care for animals before their release. And so you can see here the Elasma Branc Bycatch project, and that's being supported by Fundación Oceanographic in Spain. And what they're doing is collecting shark and ray eggs that are being unintentionally caught by fishers, and they're rearing them in their aquarium before allowing them to be released back into the sea for a second chance. Finally, I also noticed we have someone from Chester Zoo here today, and I wanted to highlight one of their projects, which I think is really exciting and really interesting. It's their Lesser Bermuda Snail project. And what they did here, alongside breeding up a population in the zoo, was actually go out to Bermuda and remove invasive predators and improve the habitat there. So these snails have the perfect conditions to be returned to. And pleased to say that 3,000 snails were released there, and they now have a really good chance of thriving in the wild. So those are a few different ideas for how your institution might be able to support a conservation project. And I'll now pass over to Michaela, who's going to talk about what you might be able to get back out of supporting a conservation partner.
Thank you, Jack. We're just handing over the slides so I can show you our part of the presentation. And the questions I will be talking about is sort of moving forward with what factors to consider when choosing your conservation partner. Because now if we're at the stage that you've considered what is it that you want to achieve with your conservation strategy, what species or issue to focus on, you've perhaps identified a possible partner and decided what it is that you as a zoo want to bring to that conservation partnership. The next question or the next stage to consider is what it is that you will need to receive back from that conservation partner, or what are your needs in that partnership. And these two questions are really important to consider for two reasons. And one of them is that you will need to receive some sort of information and feedback from your conservation partner in the field to really understand what is the impact that you're achieving, what is the progress of the project against the objectives or goals and targets that you might have set. And secondly, all of this information will be really useful to keep all your stakeholders updated, whether that's your board or your staff or visitors, on the impact and the difference that you're helping to make through this conservation partnership. So these questions are quite important to consider and really come up with a concise list of resources or outputs that you might expect to receive back from your conservation partner to make this a successful and rewarding partnership. Sorry, just trying to move on the slide. Wouter, if you're in the background, could you just help me? Apologies about it. There we go. So when considering these questions, what is important to think about is the different type of stakeholders that might be in one way or another involved in the conservation partnership. So that might be your board of directors, your senior managers, it might be your staff, or it might be your visitors. And this can sort of feed back to what Jon was talking about in terms of who is driving that conservation strategy within your zoo and to what extent they might be involved in the partnership. So when you're thinking about the board of directors within your zoo or the senior leadership and the senior managers, they might often be the people who will have the authority to authorize a budget, whether that's in terms of resources you might be able to allocate or financial contributions you might be able to work with as part of that conservation partnership. So the type of information they will need to receive back is perhaps really understanding how the money is being spent, how the resources, whether you're contributing with your technical expertise, with your staff time, or in any other way, how are they being allocated and what is the difference, what is the impact, can they measure it and can they understand what's happening. So in terms of the type of resources they may want to receive back, it might be a detailed narrative report, understanding what is the progress against the objectives and goals, what's happening in the field, if anything went wrong, what happened, and perhaps a financial report of this is where the contributions were allocated, this is how they were spent, and perhaps the ability to trace and be able to be really transparent about those financial decisions. When you consider your sort of wider zoo staff and keepers within the zoo, they are likely to be the people who are really passionate about the conservation work that's happening and that you've been part of. So what they might want to do is develop a personal connection with their conservation partner, whether that's through a donor call, whether that's through a Zoom chat or a meeting if that's possible, or a field visit. So they may want to receive back things like images or videos or stories or some sort of content from the field to understand what's happening, what are the threats that are being tackled, and what solutions are being developed and implemented by your conservation partner. And finally, if you consider perhaps the largest group of sort of stakeholders, it is your visitors. I imagine if you have an education team that's working closely with the conservation team within your zoo, they will want to talk about what is the conservation work that you're doing in situ. And that can be through a range of materials. They might need content for social media platforms or for your new website or for different events that might be running throughout the zoo, or different boards and messages that are being distributed to visitors coming in. Because zoos really have these unique platforms to inspire visitors that are coming through their gates and to really translate those conservation messages. So having resources they can work with is really important. I think the next thing to consider is really to manage your expectation, because once you've considered all the different stakeholders and you understand or can articulate what type of resources and outputs you might need from your conservation partner, it's really important to consider what is actually feasible to achieve in reality. And that's not to say that there might be any problems in getting this content back, but it is really understanding what is feasible to achieve. So having an honest conversation with a conservation partner, like Jack suggested, having a call where you drop down different questions you want to answer. So asking, what type of reporting do you offer? Would you be able to provide us with the feedback on how the project is continuing? Are you able to supply a selection of images we can use? Are you able to provide content for events we might be able to organize? It's really important questions to ask. And it will also be dependent on the sort of foundation that Jon was talking about. So in terms of what focus is on your conservation strategy. Because, for example, if you choose to focus on a very well-known charismatic species like tigers, for example, there will be loads of information out there already about the species and about the threats they face and about what's being done to protect them and support the conservation efforts. But if you choose to focus on a more sort of edge or specialist species, or a perhaps lesser known species or an issue, you might struggle to get sort of tons of information from sort of general sources like Google or internet, and you might rely more heavily on your conservation partner to provide this information. You might also experience challenges if you're working with a very sort of small partner. That might be perhaps a couple of researchers working out in a remote jungle somewhere. They might not have good enough internet signals to often supply these resources or get on a call with you and answer straight away, or they might not simply have the capacity to provide that much resources as you might expect. Or perhaps if you're working with a species like this one on the image, there just might not be as many images, stories or videos available out there because there are so few to find in the wild. So it is all really important to consider what is it you might need, but also what's feasible achieve based on the focus of your conservation strategy. And once you've considered this, it's good to know what are your minimum expectations, what are the absolute red lines, because you will need to receive some sort of feedback and information back. Because as we said, it goes back to the questions, can you understand what's happening with the project and how's it progressing and what difference it's making, so that you can really communicate that to your stakeholders, whether that's the board or visitors or your staff, and really demonstrate the impact and ensure future support for the project. So future internet buying or fundraising for that species and for that conservation partnership. So these are all really important questions, and it'd be really interesting to hear in the chat what your experience have been in working and receiving feedback back from your conservation partners. Final, I guess, factor to consider when choosing your conservation partner that we wanted to highlight and talk about is having that personal chemistry in a relationship. Because it's really good to sort of consider on an organizational level, as Jack was talking about, that's the organization you might be working with, share your values, your vision, your mission, your outlook for the future. But on a sort of day-to-day basis, you will be working with another person. You will be working on that human-to-human level, which is really important then to consider, do you get on well enough? Is that sort of personal chemistry to be able to approach that, have a sort of dedicated point of contact at the other organization? Are they approachable? Are you able to develop a sort of working professional relationship to sustain that conservation partnership over long term? So just something to consider as well. And now I guess after we've talked about all the different factors you might consider, how to, I guess, formulate your conservation strategy, how to identify your conservation partner, where to find them, what to consider. What we now wanted to sort of talk about, I guess, discuss was a different approach you might take when going through this process, and what might be the benefits of working through a matchmaker organization. So what we mean by that is working with a sort of third-party organization, like a conduit that can help provide a link between your zoological institution and a project partner out there in the field. Here in the slide, you can see on the left a range of zoos that we have worked with over the past year to support rhino conservation efforts in the wild. And on the right, you can see all the different field programs across Africa and Asia that they've been directly working with. And we, as kind of Save the Rhino, have been working as a link, as that matchmaking organization, to help provide that partnership and to help, I guess, support and facilitate the partnership between zoos and field programs on the ground. And there is a range of benefits to working through this matchmaker organization or through a third-party NGO. And much of it comes from the benefits of really providing that extra level of support, especially if your zoo has limited resources in terms of the size of your conservation department or how busy they are. Often they may not have capacity to go through all of this process on their own, and working with a range of field partners out there sort of directly. What might really help in terms of the efficiency and effectivity of their work might be working with an established partner that might already have answers to many of the questions they are looking for. So, for example, we at Save the Rhino have developed long-standing relationships with our field program partners, working with them for 5, 10, 15 years. We know they are reliable and trusted field program. We understand the impact that contributions can make and can demonstrate back to zoos how their money are being spent, can feed back with the resources that might need, whether that's in terms of visual content, stories, or that sort of one-on-one relationship with the partners in the field. So it is just a different approach you might consider taking rather than sort of going directly to a field program partner. You might choose to work through an organization that might help facilitate this relationship and make it into a really successful partnership. And I will just finish with a note on sort of an example of how we've been doing this, because as Frederica mentioned, we've been working with zoos for, I think, over 15 years now, if not more. And we have really come to understand what zoos might need from that conservation partnership. So whether that's in terms of understanding what species, issue or activity they might want to focus on with their conservation work, to also understanding what type of feedback, resources and outputs they might need, whether that's in terms of supporting events like you can see here and World Rhino Day at Wilhelma Zoo in Stuttgart, or a zoo run at Alertness World in Hanover. We are able to support those events with different resources because that's where our expertise would come in, but also understanding what the conservation partners in the field need. So you can see rangers from South Africa who have received their new kits, that is sleeping bags, backpacks, different camping kits so they can spend time in remote environment tackling poaching, and that's been directly funded through our zoo partners as well. So really providing that link between what's needed out in the field and what zoos are able to provide, and facilitating those connections between zoos and conservation partners on the ground. And now I will hand over to Jon, back to kind of considering what is the next step.
Thanks, Michaela. Let's see if I've got control back. Not yet. Maybe it'll come in a minute. Ah, got him. Okay. We really want to hear from everybody in the audience, so I'll go through this bit pretty quickly. But if you've built up a relationship, you've found what you think is the right partner, you know why you're looking for a partner, and you've identified a potential one, you've been out on a date and you've looked for your personal chemistry. How do you manage that relationship? What do you do, particularly if it's not going well? And I'm just going to run through very quickly 3 pieces of advice that we've learned over the years and that we can pass on to you and I hope are useful. The first one, if I can persuade the slide to move, go on, you can do it. No, I've lost. I'll request control again. Okay. All right. Back in the days of my youth in the Pleistocene, somebody who was much wiser than me, once told me that there are no relationships between organizations. There are just relationships between people in organizations. And I think that's really worth remembering, that communication is so important. So Michaela's been talking about articulating what it is that you want to be able to get out of a relationship, as well as what Jack was saying about what you want to bring to the relationship. Keep talking to your partners, keep articulating, particularly in the early days when you're getting to know each other, build up an understanding of who they are and how they work, and make sure that they build up an understanding of who you are and what you want to get out of this. So communication, like any human relationship, is absolutely the key. And in my experience, 90% of disputes or bad feelings can be resolved by good communication. Most of it is misunderstanding rather than anything else. And unlike a romantic relationship, I think there's probably no harm in putting things down in writing with these kind of partnerships. It doesn't need a big legal agreement, but a 1-page or a 2-page at most, very simple, very clear partnership agreement that says, this is what we're bringing to the partnership, this is what you're bringing, This is what we expect to get out of it. This is what you're expecting to get out of it. To have that clearly written down at the beginning is a tremendous basis for then being able to talk around things later on, sort out any problems, just be very clear on what everybody wants to get out of it. So a simple partnership agreement, I think, is a great tool to have. It really helps. And the last piece of advice, I was looking at the clock, I'll go quickly. Work hard at it, but if things are not going well and you've tried and you've talked to people and it's still not working out, don't stay for very, very long. We have had partnerships with conservation programs in the past where they're perfectly good programs, but the relationship with us wasn't working well. We didn't feel like they were getting enough feedback, or perhaps we were contributing something, but they were thought they were so big that they didn't need to acknowledge our presence in the partnership. And we have quietly just said, sorry, this isn't working for us. We're pulling back, we're pulling out. Or we've changed our conservation priorities and next year we'll be moving elsewhere. Thank you very much. Or you can just resort to good old fashioned, it's not you, it's me. But whichever route you take, work hard at it. But if after working hard it's not working, then come back out and look for. There are a lot of conservation programs out there. You will find somebody that you really enjoy working with. And as Michaela said, you can either work through a matchmaker or you can go and find them yourself. But they will be out there. Your ideal partner does exist. I'm going to quickly hand back to Michaela and for one last slide, and then we get to hear from you guys, I think.
Thank you, Jon. Good, and I won't take up too much of your time anymore because it would be really interesting to get more into the discussion and hear your experiences with this topic. But what we wanted to is just to quickly sum up what we've covered in this presentation. I know some of you joined a bit later, at a later stage in the presentation, and it will be available for recording. But the kind of things we wanted to highlight through this presentation is to really know how important setting the foundation is, how important it is to start with forming your conservation strategy, which can be very simple. It can just define what are your aims with what is your conservation program, why you're looking for a partner, and what you want to achieve. Then we've sort of moved on to, once you understand what you want to achieve through your conservation strategy, is to understand where you can look for a potential partner, understanding what options are out there, what organizations or programs are working on that specific species or issue that you want to focus on, and really highlighting how important it is to check them out, to really get in touch and find out what are their strategies, how they're conducting their work, are they really a good match with the kind of organization you are looking for. What's also really important to consider is, as we highlighted, is what is it that you want to bring into the partnership? What have you got to offer? What value would your institution bring, whether that's in terms of funding contribution, whether that's in terms of technical expertise, staff time, resources, or any other things. And once you understand that, really knowing what is it that you need to receive back from the relationship. If it's a partnership, it's important to think about it as two partners, and it is about the value that you bring and the value that you need to receive back to make it effective. We've also highlighted how important the personal chemistry is in that relationship, because on a day-to-day basis, you are working with another human being, and it is important that you can develop a really good working relationship. And how important it is to give these things a go, because there might be hundreds of factors to consider, but what's important is to make a start and adaptively kind of manage and adapt throughout that relationship. And as Jon said, work at it and try sort of working and improving the relationship on a monthly basis, and if for whatever reason it's not working out for you, and if you're not happy and you're not receiving what you thought you would get out of that conservation partnership, don't stay at it, because there are plenty of partners out there to help fulfill your conservation strategy and your aims, and really make most impact and really make that difference that you are hoping to achieve. So those are some of our lessons or experience we wanted to share, and it would be great to hear from you in the discussion as well. I'll hand over back to Meryl, who will facilitate this discussion now.
Thank you, Michaela and Jon and Jack, for all the insights. I've been following the chat, and I see already some exchange of kind of approaches for different parts of what you touched upon in the presentation. And one of the things I always take from this presentation, but also others I've seen about, you know, how to choose a partner, is that it's so important to set that base. You know, why are you searching for a partner? To formulate your strategy. And I was wondering, first of all, from the participants, but also if one of the SRI team can add their experience about how, you know, this strategy, it doesn't appear overnight. Have any of the participants, and you can put it in the chat, you know, what has been the timeline for your institution, if it hasn't developed a conservation strategy in the past, for developing it? Are you aware of this? I'm looking at the chat to see if anybody has a comment on that, because I can imagine not everybody is maybe involved in this part of developing a strategy. And I don't see specific timelines come by yet. So can I ask maybe Jon, if you can share kind of your experience, or at least like what is your insight into that? Like, how long does it take to formulate a strategy? What is realistic?
Well, in the case of Save the Rhino, 25 years so far, and we're still working at it.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a long time, and I think like any of these things, you start small and you start simple. So if you're a zoo that doesn't have a conservation strategy, I would say identify what your key thing is. What is it you're known for? What is it you'd like to be known for? And just start with that. If you've got an amazing tiger display or exhibit, and you're really excited about tigers, they're a wonderful charismatic umbrella species. Get involved in a little bit of tiger conservation. There are a lot of people working in that field, so there'll be a lot of people there to help you, and get involved and grow it. Start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with something easy and straightforward, and then grow it from there. And you refine it as you go along. This is adaptive management. So you know, you learn what you're good at as you go along. Learn what your different partners are good at, and which partners you love working with and which ones you don't. And that may take you off in unforeseen directions, but just keep working at it, keep adapting the management of it, and just let it grow and get better at it.
Thanks, Jon. Yeah, I see also in the chat that Simon Rusland specifically says what you said, also start simple and start from there. So there's in a way, it's good to know that there's no perfection, and it will always change over the time. Liberty Olds in the chat mentions that it took them 2 years, and they included a lot of staff and volunteers to bring along, which is also good. You know, it's not done in isolation. Talking about isolation, I think earlier in the chat it was mentioned specifically about connecting with other zoos. That this is an EAZA webinar. It's not only attended by EAZA members, but so it's good even to highlight that other zoos in other regions that we have relationships with might also be good to connect with, because they may be more close to the species because they're in range or something like that. Has anybody in this group connected with conservation partners like that through a zoo in another country or in the range country? I would be curious to see. I'll give some time for typing. I see Carl has. Can you type, is it specifically a certain country, or have you, because I know that you work in Malaysia a lot. Yeah, they are working with Taman Safari in Indonesia. And can you say in the chat what the what the help is that they have given? Was it the direct connection to the partners, or more an advice? Yeah, good project relations. Yeah, so it's also worth to look at other zoos outside of the EAZA scope, of course. When you talk about call a friend, it might also be in another region. I also see Carl saying mainly financial support on key species. Yeah. If anybody else has nothing to add, I do have some other questions. Let me see. It's one of the difficult questions as well. I've seen it in the chat as well, and it was briefly mentioned in the presentation. How do you make sure that you have the biggest impact with the lowest amount of resource that you may have? And I was curious, first of all, to see from the participants if there's anybody who has kind of developed their own way of assessing impact of what they are doing. Because I know it's not there's not a one solution for it, but I would be happy to see if there's people that can share if they have developed a tool for their institution, because I think that's very valuable, and we within EAZA are also looking into collecting those. I see a framework called SPECS with double C. So that sounds like a trademarked way of evaluating or assessing impact. I'll have a look at that later. Maybe if you have a link, if it is really something that we can find maybe publicly, please add the link to the chat for people to approach. If it's something that you developed yourself, then of course it's up to you if you share this or not. I see Carl also has placed a comment about that he has a impact assessment. Is that a tool that you developed yourself? Sorry, or is it kind of a existing tool that you use? Maybe he's typing. Maybe while he's typing, can I ask some of the SRI team to see if, do you have a specific tool developed for yourselves that you can use across the board? Or if you have something that you talked a lot about adaptive management, so I can assume that it changes over time, but is there one from the team that can answer their experiences?
Hi, yeah, I can share a little bit, and then perhaps Jon or Jack can add a bit more. I think on the strategy level, the way we've developed our strategy was through a log frame. So we set our objectives and different activities, and we also consider how we can measure against those objectives, what indicators we're looking at, and what is the time frame for them. So we have a framework for monitoring the strategy on a very sort of high level, but day to day for us in terms of working with our field programs, one thing that's really important is having that long-term relationship and having that trust developed with our conservation partners in a way that we can monitor how the project is going through formal means like 6-monthly and 12-monthly grant reports, which are really detailed, and we ask for financial sort of budgets, all of that as well, but having that day-to-day connection and understanding as well. So having regular WhatsApp messages and emails with our conservation partners, understanding what's happening and how the money is being allocated, so we understand, are we having the biggest impact? But also what Jack was talking about, understanding on the more global level, what are the priorities for the species, what are the key threats, and are we working within those spaces, and are we really contributing to the targets within the national and continental level as well. There were a couple of points within the chat that I noticed people asked in terms of what is the proportion of the funding that goes towards administration of fees and how much of that is actually going to the field. So I just thought I'd quickly share in terms of us as Save the Rhino and working with zoos, we commit to passing on 100% of the funding we receive from zoo partners directly to the field. So if your zoo contributes whatever amount it is, 100% of that is going directly to conservation partners in the field to spend on their activities. We do not accept any administration fees because we understand how valuable those funds are. So I just thought I'd mention that because a few questions have come up. But Jack or John, if you want to add more, please do.
Yeah, I quite like to just add on the financial contribution bit there as well first. And I know it's something at Save the Rhino, we're really proud of the fact that we try and keep our admin costs really low as well. And so I think our last impact report that we have publicly available, I think for every pound that we received in fundraising, 83 pence went out to our field programme partners and 17 pence was spent on fundraising and overhead costs. And that is something we're very proud of, and it is partly because we are a small and very focused team, and our real ambition is to get all of those funds out to our programme partners as much as possible. But obviously it does cost money to do this kind of work, and I think if you're looking at different organisations, they will have different routes that they use, I should say, and how they split their money. And so looking at things like impact reports and the difference that they're making should be the real key thing to do. And it may not always be that every organisation can commit to giving 100% of your zoo's donation to the field, but I think you can generally gain a sense of whether the money is being spent well or not from looking at those sources, is what I would say to that point. Yeah.
Could I just add on the monitoring front? As many of you will know very, very well, it's incredibly difficult. And I think there's probably 3 points I'd highlight. One of them is that from the financial and the management information system aspect, there is a temptation to go for simple indicators, number of miles of fence built or number of Land Rovers purchased, something that is easily measurable. And as we've said, conservation projects are incredibly complex, even before you start including Homo sapiens. So any simple indicator is likely to be unhelpful in a very complex world. So there's a tension there to start with. The second one is that there is no counterfactual. There's never a control group. So imagine an example where, heaven forbid, we lose 2 rhinos in a reserve to poaching one year. So one of our zoo partners comes in and makes a significant investment in the security of that area, and next year they lose 3 rhinos. Was that a failure? We will never know, because we don't know how many they would have lost if it wasn't for that investment. So there's no control group, there's no counterfactual we can use for comparison. It is possible, from my experience, and I've worked quite a lot on this, it is possible to come up with decent indicators that are measurable, where we can say this program of work is making a positive or negative, is making a difference or it isn't. Usually that is possible. What is not possible, and which sometimes frustrates managers, is attribution. To answer the question, and unless you can clearly demonstrate something made a positive difference and you paid for 100% of it. But that's a very, very rare occasion. Most conservation efforts are partnerships. They have to be, because they're so complicated. And therefore being able to say, oh yes, yeah, our partnership had a success and 50% of it was us, that's pushing the boundaries. So good conservation indicators are possible, and it's possible to say we contributed to that outcome. But to be able to say exactly how much we contributed to that outcome, that's probably where the limit lies. Attribution is accurate attribution is not possible.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I know it's a very complicated topic. And that's why I was also interested to see if other people have some stuff to share about this. And a good point that one person made in the chat, I think Marie Liao, if I'm pronouncing your name right, I hope. Impact assessment is one thing, but yeah, the evaluation of your actual partner is maybe separate. And I guess there's no, at least I'm not aware of any specific evaluation tool for that. And I guess it should come hopefully from a good conservation strategy, like what type of person are you looking for, what type of collaborator you are looking for. And I was wondering if I see Marie says yes, wondering if anybody in the chat has some experience in that, if they have a more structured way of evaluating a partner coming from a strategy. And in case the team of SRI has something to add about that, I don't think you have that rigorous like checkbox for selecting your partners, because you have a more maybe adaptive and kind of exploratory way of looking for partners, or am I now completely off? I see Jack joining, yeah?
Yeah, Michaela and John may well be better placed to answer this than me, but I think one of the key things for Save the Rhino is how long we've worked with our field program partners. And so most of them, the relationships are, 5 years or much longer than that. And so in that time, we know how they work. We know that we, get on with what they do. We trust them to be the most effective partners. It's also about our resources and where we focus them. And so we have our number of partners at the moment, and we're very happy sort of managing that level or that number of partnerships. So that is a very key thing. I think we mentioned earlier in the presentation about the key 1 and key 2 populations in Africa especially, and that definitely guides our strategy and which partners we do work with. And I think that was, I'm not sure how many years ago, but when that was sort of definitively put into our strategy, it did change slightly the list of partners that we worked with, and we really did focus in on those partners with the larger, more viable populations. But it is all about those long-term relationships for us, I would say. But John and Michaela, if you have anything to add, please do.
Don't see them. Oh, I do. No, John has not. Okay. I think that's kind of, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat, which is really good. And we will make sure that this is also shared to everybody who was here, so you can see the suggestions and some of the links that were provided. And I think I hope it was very helpful. And we're also running out of time, or we're actually nicely on time. So I think we can start wrapping up the session. And I just want to start by thanking Jon, Jack, and Michaela very much for providing this presentation and working with us to help members, but also non-members, to think about different ways to find the right partner in conservation. And I am planning to, together with you and with Friederike, to see if we can kind of make a summary of it, maybe even a little bit of a decision tree that can help people that were not here to get kind of a basis going. And yeah, so before we wrap up, I would like to ask if Jon has anything else to say as the leader of the pack.
Oh, I don't think I'm the leader at all.
You're
But,
not? No.
I would just say thank you very much. Thank you to EAZA for inviting us. I hope we've been able to say some useful things to you and to help. Thank you for everybody who turned up and listened to us. I hope we've been able to stimulate some discussion and perhaps say one or two useful things. If you want to follow up with any of us, we'd be very, very happy to hear from you and very, very happy to respond. Otherwise, thank you for your time. We look forward to spending time with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jon. Jack,
Just like to add thank you very much to everyone at EAZA and Frederica from the Rhino Tag as well for hosting this for us, and thank you again to everyone for coming to listen. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks very much. The recordings will, of course, be made available after, probably through Facebook, but we'll have a YouTube channel, so have a look out for that. In the next couple of days, we will upload the session. Then I think I can end with wishing you all well. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hope to see you alive, or at least in the flesh in the future, and otherwise in some other online event. Thanks very much. Bye.